Discussion for a late night show.
Right.
Yeah. What I feel about those numbers is the statistics generally, and it's not just a case for Kenya, but if you look around, and not just in Africa, but globally, I think it's just a sad situation of a sad situation.
Right.
But I'm glad that we are not disheartened, and organizations such as HIVOS have come up with bold and daring programs like the Rural Women Cultivating Change, which are ready to dismantle those beliefs, which are ready to, very boldly tackle some of those issues, which we'll be discussing in today's show.
Right.
So yeah, I'm glad that we do have organizations that have stepped up to make sure that then this does not continue, or to actually do our very best to see that either we reduce the statistics or we do something about it.
Right. Of course, Mombi, when we looked at the statistics, once again, the region, the Pan-African, region is particularly troublesome when it comes to women and owning land. They are disproportionately disadvantaged in comparison to, the male counterparts. And maybe this is a more patriarchal problem. If you could just tell us more about that.
Yeah. And one of the things I like to say is that for us to actually unlock some of those conversations that we are having around women and agriculture, and of course access to land being one of the biggest challenges when it comes to women in agriculture, I think is to look at women as valuable assets in unlocking economic growth or accelerating economic growth, not just for Kenya, but also from a Pan-African conversation. And I like to say that if African countries were actually going to deliberately invest in women, in equal opportunities, invest in women's rights, then what we would be doing by that is that we would be unlocking 50% or half of our African population, which is women. So you can imagine what that translates to in terms of achieving our SDGs, in terms of food security, in terms of coping with climate change, which is now a big African conversation. So we are talking about half of the African population being women, and we're talking about half of that population being marginalized and having an equal access to resources and to land in particular. When it comes to land, we definitely cannot have a conversation around agriculture and women, and we fail to have a conversation on land, because then land is the resource that agriculture happens on. And it is true that we do have patriarchal systems, we do have cultures that we have found in place that have definitely over time, for a very long time, persistently ensured that women do not have access to and control over land. And where women have access, they don't have control, because those are two different things.
Of course.
Yeah, and that is why our project is looking at how we can empower women to just understand what their land rights are, to also ensure that we are working with the men and the communities, the religious leaders, the community leaders, for whom the cultures, like the beneficiaries of those cultures and the people who actually drive those cultures, to see, fine, we love traditions and we love culture, we love our cultural heritage, but where we have cultures that are actually demeaning women or are contrary to the Bill of Rights, then we have to do away with that.
Now, there are huge contrasting numbers, as we have highlighted. Of course, rural women cultivating change. I assume there's a double entendre.
Yes.
There's the cultivation aspect of course, agriculture, but then there's a cultivating change, growing an interest in change and a culture of change. Now, in Kenya, 1 to 6% of land is owned by women, but regionally it goes up to 15%. In the African continent, it goes up to 20%. Kenya does consider itself as a regional leader. Why are we not a leader in this aspect?
We are not a leader in this aspect because I think we haven't really focused on the woman. So we do have progressive laws, I agree. In Kenya, I think we have about 79 laws that are governing our land conversations. The legal framework governing Kenya, we have about 79 laws. And then we have the Constitution of Kenya, and we have so many other policies that have come, the latest being the National Land Policy. But what I can say is that we have not had deliberate interventions that are looking at the issues of women. And so that is why when it comes to counting numbers and looking at statistics and seeing actually how many Kenyan women own land, how many Kenyan women actually can access land and say, I have access to this land and I have control over it. That is where we are failing. Because our interventions, even though the Constitution has mandated us to do that, even though we have a very robust legal framework, implementation of those policies and laws then has always remained a problem. And it has not actually involved women. Women are not part and parcel of the policy-making process and the implementation process.
Right. So the laws are there. They're very comprehensive, very well built. But, you know, when it comes to implementation, that's where we usually have the problem. Yes. We do have, you know, a few statistics that we can be going through here as we look at some of the, you know, differences that we're seeing between men and women, people who own land, and transforming of decision-making structures when it comes to, you know, this land. Here it is. When it comes to, you know, transforming these laws that govern lands one and that governs the ownership of land, what do you think are some of the changes we could be making?
I think we have a lot of opportunity in legal reform when it comes to land ownership, especially in the aspect of looking at it from a gender perspective.
All right.
One of them, of course, we have been looking at the laws around matrimonial property. And that has been actually like the biggest problem, because how women own land in Kenya, or how women have been owning land in Kenya, is by being associated with a man. It is either a husband, a father, a brother, an uncle. So if it is my father, I inherit my father's land. If it is my husband, then I have a legal right to that land because I'm married to this man. So it has been just about educating women, because the laws are there, but creating awareness around them has been the problem. So the women are not even aware that we have some laws that are actually protecting them when it comes to land ownership. And what our project is doing is actually a lot of sensitization, a lot of translation of this material, because then it is complex. It's complex legal jargon.
Yes.
And we don't expect that our rural farmers would actually be able to understand what it means for them. So we've been translating for them in a language that they can understand, ensuring that they have access to that information. But most importantly, just taking them through what, how the law has protected them, what the Constitution has said about protecting women and property, and creating that awareness, that sensitization. And we have seen quite some change when it comes to the knowledge gap that we are closing in terms of women's understanding of their rights in land ownership.
All right. Let's just go through a few numbers here so that we have a bit of context. Women in Kenya only own 1% or 1 to 6% of agricultural land. And this, you know, represents the widest gender disparity in the country, considering that the agricultural sector, you know, contributes to about a third of the gross domestic product. We get a lot of money from this. It is the backbone of our economy. But women are, you know, the disparity is alarming, to be honest. And this is according to the U.S. Agency for International Development. And more than 70% of Kenyans derive their income from agriculture. And of course, when we continue with that, we see that around 80% of farmers in many communities are female. And usually, especially if we look at our Kenyan cultures, we do see that planting, you know, cultivation is a communal thing. When we are trying to trigger change, do you believe that maybe we should be going to the root of the problem, which is, you know, our perception and our cultures and our beliefs?
Yes. For us, that is where we catalyze change. And that is why we have gone back to the rural areas. Our project is very rural focused, and we focus on some of the inequalities or disparities in terms of culture, in terms of beliefs, in terms of traditions that are actually practiced in the rural areas that have, in one way or another, ensured that women do not realize their full potential. And it is true, I agree with these statistics. It is very true that agriculture is contributing to about 34-35% of our GDP as a country. It is also true that we have 70% of the agricultural labor force is women. And it is also true that about 40% of that is actually small scale farmers, right? Who is the demographic that our project focuses on. And the reason we are focusing on small-scale farming is we have realized because of globalization and commercialization and climate change, so small-scale farming is now contributing to a lot more, and actually it is the backbone of food security.
Right.
And so if you have 40% of women who are practicing small-scale farming, then you can see there is a problem there, because then we do not have practices that are actually gendered when it comes to agriculture. And the challenges that women face in agriculture are the challenges that we are trying to tackle. So I agree with these statistics, and it's just a very sad state of affairs that you can have a sector that is contributing to that huge percentage to our GDP, and the people who are actually carrying the burden of realizing that in terms of economic growth are not factored in when it comes to development, when it comes to policy making, and even when it comes to distribution of resources in that sector. Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about the disproportionate, bearing of responsibility within the community, because women, most of the time in the traditional scenario, they go to the farms in the morning, they come back, they take care of the kids, they cook for the family, take care of the husband at night. It's a continuous cycle of labor, and maybe this is one of the reasons why they cannot access information that they need. You have said that your organization is working on sensitizing women in this respect. What are some of the challenges that you have met when it comes to sensitization?
Actually, in the beginning of the project, we did a time use survey. And I think that is usually very important when it comes to generating evidence for such projects. You say women don't have time, and somebody wants to see what are the numbers, what are you talking about?
Right.
Paint for me a picture, what does this woman do from when she wakes up?
Right.
When we were doing the baseline for this project, one of the things we were very interested in knowing is actually how are women managing their time.
All right.
And it is true, these women wear different hats during the day. So as a farmer, this woman is involved in the weeding, is involved in weeding, is involved in plowing, is involved in planting, is involved in harvesting.
Right.
As a mother wife, this woman is involved in running her family. She's in charge of her household nutrition. So she has to look for food. She has to take care of her children. She has to take care of the livestock. I mean, it's like a lot. So when it comes to shaping programs like this that are supporting women, then you just have to be very deliberate. You have to know that this woman, in terms of time use and time allocation, if you set up a meeting, for example, at 8 a.m., this woman will not be able to come.
All right.
Because maybe it is her time to go to the shamba, it's her time to take care of her livestock, her children. So you have to be very deliberate. Even when we're doing our sensitization meetings, we agree with them and we look at what is the appropriate time to actually involve a woman. What we have seen is sometimes what we call public participation. It works for some, but in rural areas, most of the time it doesn't work. What are the timings that have been put, for example, for public participation forums? And are they actually, is it a time that a woman can afford to participate and participate meaningfully in public participation? What is the distance that this woman is traveling to attend a public participation forum, and what does it mean for her? So I find that for us to be able to sensitize women properly and correctly, and to ensure that women participate meaningfully in our sensitization meetings, but also in what we call public participation at the county level, in the rural areas, at the chief's place, is to be very deliberate about factoring in some of those things, including time, including distance, and to see what the woman can accommodate, and ensure that we are deliberate in that programming to ensure that they participate meaningfully.
All right, which is very essential, especially when it comes to, data gathering, because this data is what is used, especially when policies are being formed. And policy formulation is a very important, it's a key factor in instigating change within the community. When it comes to muzzling of women, you do need them to give you the correct data. You do need them to, engage with you as openly as possible. But of course, there are factors that could muzzle women, like gender-based violence. What are some of the things that, cause some of this muzzling?
One of them, like you have said, is gender-based violence. The other big thing is now climate change, and we have been looking at the nexus between climate change and SGBV. And there is a whole debate and a whole lot of issues that have come up. Climate change in one way or another has also affected women's participation in these processes because of forced migration, increased rates of SGBV. When there is drought or erratic rainfall, we have young girls that are now being married off because their families are struggling at family level, at household level, to put food on the table. So we have increased rates of FGM, we have increased rates of early marriages because of drought, erratic rainfall. So we can see already what climate change is doing. The other thing that keeps women away from these conversations is just lack of knowledge. If you go to the rural areas and you look at the level of literacy, you will find that we have more men who are literate than the women. And so generally men are more involved in those processes. If a chief, for example, we have something we want to communicate and a chief is calling for the meeting, you will find it's only men who attend those meetings. Either because of that ignorance on the part of the women, because they don't know any better, but also because of cultural attitudes that perceive certain discussions a pertinent issue for men or a space for men and not for women. And so we have been very deliberate. We are aware of those gaps, and so we have really been working on women and ensuring that we have separate forums for women to ensure that also the voice of women is heard. If you go to gather statistics or data or information from a gathering where only men have attended, for sure you'll not have anything on women. So you also have to understand the different demographics and the different dynamics of every society that we are working in. In Kenya, we are working in 4 counties, and each of those counties have different cultures, different attitudes, different beliefs. But we have been able to identify allies who help us, who can help us to identify if you go this way, there's going to be a challenge. And so we're also working with community leaders. We are working with religious leaders to just ensure that what are harmful cultural practices, we try as much as possible to avoid them and to preach the gospel of we respect traditions and we respect culture. We celebrate cultural heritage, but if we have cultures that are inconsistent with the Bill of Rights, if we have cultures that are demeaning or promoting gender inequality, then that is where we draw the line.
All right, which is very important. They always say that it is the wearer of the shoe who knows where it pinches the most.
Yes.
Right, speaking of knowledge, let us look at a few numbers here. We have said that 80% of farmers in many communities are female, and this is from the World Bank, and women grow 70% of Africa's food. Very much disenfranchised if we look at the number, of women who are currently owning lands. Now, if you do look at the statistics further, it says a mere 0.5% of women have access to financial services. Now, it is very important to note that you could have a piece of land, but there's very little you can do with it if you do not have the seeds and the farming inputs. 0.5%. What are your thoughts on this?
It's true, and it's very sad. Like we said, to access these financial services, a woman is supposed to, generally any person is supposed to give collateral use, giving a title deed. But then, as we said, women do not have control over this land. So they access this land to farm, but there is very little, other than farming, there is very little you can do with that land. Actually, you don't own it. You don't have control over it. So we've been working with financial institutions to just see how we can come up with friendly, gender-friendly or women-friendly financial services, because also agriculture is capital intensive. So you're not telling this woman to practice agriculture and to practice it correctly, and you're not providing the right resources for it or the money for it. So how can our financial institutions, especially in the rural areas, come up with friendly programs or gender-friendly programs that can support women's access to financial services, and that is actually one of our interventions.
All right. Yeah. Now, if we do look at this number a little bit more keenly, 0.5% is already a very shocking number. It's already a very shocking number. And having access to financial services is already so hard for women within the agricultural, within, you know, MSMEs in general, in the agricultural sector, it must be much, much harder. Now, for a lot of these women, they might not have collateral when they're going to seek financial services. There should be, you know, provisions that have been made in financial institutions for them to get, you know, more favorable loans. Is there anything that your institution is doing on that front? Yes,
like I said, we are collaborating with financial institutions to ensure that small-scale farmers, smallholder farmers, small and medium enterprises that are working in the agricultural value chain get friendly support. Generally, we are working with women. So the first thing we did was a mapping of those MSMEs in those counties. So we looked at what are some of the things that women have done, or some of the mushrooming small and medium term enterprises that women have come up with across the agricultural value chain. And then we presented the list to a number of financial institutions. And of course, also the financial institutions need a lot of sensitization, and they need resources. So it is for us to say there is value in supporting this woman. There is value in supporting this business that is owned by this woman. This is what this business is contributing to. And so what we are doing is we are working in those financial institutions at the county level. We have also tried as much as possible to work with county governments to ensure once in a while or once a quarter we organize meetings where we have investors, we have the farmers, and we have those financial institutions. And then that way we provide a platform for these farmers to interact with various financial institutions to get the correct information about where we can access these finances. And for us is to create that awareness, to create that collaboration and partnerships so that we can support our women farmers.
Mombi, when it comes to upskilling is very important, because even as you said, financial institutions are not willing to bank on someone that they cannot, you know, they do not see, you know, the prospect of the money coming back. When it comes to upskilling women, of course, there are things that your institution is doing, but you do help in, you know, policy formation and pushing on policies. Do you believe that there are some things that your institution or even the government could be doing to upskill women?
Yes. I think in this sector, we have to employ a multifaceted approach. Because you see, it is a very complicated scenario, because we are dealing with, on one hand, you're dealing with policies, you're retrogressive laws, for sure, because they exist. On the other hand, you're dealing with very complex cultural beliefs and attitudes. On the other hand, you're dealing with a very fragile society and poverty. So you have to employ a multifaceted approach, and I really like that that is what our project is doing. Other than laws and formulation, we are also investing in leadership of women, because we feel like if the rural women themselves are able to speak up for themselves, they're able to take up leadership positions, not even national, county, rural, they are able to voice their issues, they are able to get those leadership positions. It was very shocking, actually, to find that even in the rural areas, like farmer associations are led by men.
Right.
Market associations are led by men. So market conversations are led by men. Everything that has access to seeds, access to fertilizers, every meeting is led by men. So, and it's the women who are farming. So, right, you can see the quagmire there. So I believe that for us to upscale these issues and for us to even upscale our interventions, we have to employ not just, it's not very linear. We have to employ a multifaceted approach. And the good thing is that we are not working in Kenya, we're also working in Tanzania and Ethiopia. And that is also part of upskilling, because we are also challenging other barriers in other countries, because there is also a lot of similarities in East African countries, in the Eastern African context. So one of the things we are doing, of course, is to ensure that we have inclusive laws and policies, and not just having them, but we are also implementing them. In Kenya, for example, of course, agriculture is devolved, but when it comes to making laws and policies, it's still a mandate for the national government. But how is that translating to actual implementation of the laws, and how is that actually translating to helping the woman in the rural area? How is that helping agriculture? The other thing, of course, other than inclusive laws and policies, is to also ensure that we put the woman at the decision-making table by promoting leadership of the rural women. Can they participate in these processes at their rural areas, in their counties? Can they be identified? Can they be recognized? Can what they are doing be recognized by their county governments? And for counties to say that actually we cannot succeed even in growing our counties without supporting our women farmers, right? The other thing I have seen is that women have a lot of indigenous knowledge when it comes to agriculture, but that has often been associated with men, which is not a bad thing. Right. But we are not saying it's a bad thing. Right. But if you look, for example, at the National Agricultural Transformation Strategy for Kenya, I think it's 2019 to 2029, it has put academia, government institutions at the forefront of knowledge generation, and then farmers have been put as consumers of this knowledge. But when we look at the reality on the ground is that farmers have a lot to offer in terms of indigenous. They generate this information. They have a lot of indigenous knowledge around planting, around seeds, around seasons, around climate change that we can tap into. And when you look into it further, once you interrogate it further, you'll actually realize it is women who are holders of this indigenous knowledge. So how about we stop looking at our farmers as users and consumers of that knowledge, but actually people who can offer this knowledge. That's why I'm saying it has to be a multifaceted approach. We are not only challenging the laws, but we're also challenging our cultures. We are also challenging our social norms and our beliefs around gender equality.
Right, Mombi, you've brought, into perspective a few things that are very important. One is the aspect of capacity building, especially when it comes to women, and two, market access when it comes to women. And those are two things that are very important when it comes to increasing your yields and finding where to take your yields at the end of the day. And we will be discussing that in a few. But first, let's just look at the credit needs for expansion of farmland. Women who are above 65 years have about 23.1%, access to credit needs when they need credit for expansion of, their farmland. Say this is the 6% of women who actually own land, right? Yeah. Now, women above 65 years is already a very interesting factor. The national average for a farmer, national age for a farmer is about 61 years. 65 is already 4 years past that mark. Where is the new generation of women? Where are they? Why are they not, expanding land? Why are they not seeking credit? Where have we left the young women?
Are they farming?
Right. In the first place.
Are they farming in the first place? And I feel like it's a whole discussion of the conversation around youth and agriculture, right, and what we as young people perceive agriculture to be, right? So the statistics is very interesting because we are looking at women above 65, and it is true. Even when we go to our meetings and the people that we've been engaging in this project, it is true that most of them actually is the older generation of women. Right. And we have also been asking ourselves, where are the young people? But I think it is the messaging that has gone into what agriculture is, and looking at agriculture as this sector that is not only capital and labor intensive, but then it is for a certain demographic of people. Where you have to be old, you have to look a certain type of way. Like we're not making exactly. Right? And we are not making agricultural conversations or even providing agriculture as an alternative form of employment for young people. So you will find a lot of young people migrating from their rural areas to urban areas to look for employment, while actually they would have stayed in the rural areas and performed agriculture and been self-employed. But also, let us look at the issue of access to land for a young person. With what has happened in the counties, the land is now very expensive. Where are the young people going to farm? But I think it's not to say that all is lost. I feel like there is so much more that we can do to ensure that we provide agriculture as a sector that is providing alternative employment for young people, and to not have the perception that agriculture is for a certain demographic, and women who look a certain type of, they are poor, they are struggling. To try and make the conversation around agriculture interesting and to pull our young people into this is a very sad state of affairs, right? Yes. And having that at 23%, that is also like a very depressing statistics, but also having this older generation is the only generation that is participating in agriculture is also very sad. And I feel there are quite a number of interventions that we can come up with very deliberately also to ensure that we have young people participating in agriculture.
All right. Mombi, this also brings into perspective the fact that that women, especially older women, you see your mother, she has been, the dad is the owner of the land. Mom is the one who does all the work, but dad gets all the yields and he gets all the money at the end of the month. Why should I even engage in this? Do you believe that maybe we are the ones who have, ruined the perspective for the women who might be even taking up agriculture?
Yes, it is part of what we have grown up with. The thing is that these are not things that are very far away from our households. If you even ask around this room, that has been the situation in most of our African households, that the woman toils and the man shines, right? So, so you will have this woman toiling and doing all the hard work, but then you have the man who is going to reap the benefits. Actually, most women do not go near the market because then it is the man's business to sell whatever the woman has produced. Right. So I feel it's something we have grown up seeing, and it is something then that we need to work on the social fabric of society to change that perception and belief. And that's why I was saying, for us to have a conversation with young people, even looking at agriculture as an alternative form of employment, there's a lot of beliefs and perceptions based on what we have seen happening in our societies that needs to change.
Right. And since you've already taken a nosedive into markets, let's talk about the markets and the access of women who are in agriculture to those markets. Of course, they're already disenfranchised. Men are the ones who run the shots most of the time. Do you believe that there are ways that we can change this? Are there ways that your institution is instigating to change this?
Yeah. I think number one is to produce evidence, because I have realized in the gender equality space, we say we have a lot of challenges and we are facing this and this, but usually we have no data, or we have very little data to back what we are talking about. So what we have seen is generally the involvement of women in the agricultural value chain, right from production to processing to marketing, is very minimal, and it's very unequal. And it's very depressing, to be very honest, right? So when it comes to markets, women have no access because, like I said, if you don't have control over the resources that you're using to produce this food, then how can you have control over the market?
Exactly.
And it is a very sad situation, but what we are doing is to provide education to women on how they can empower themselves when it comes to marketing. We have also been trying to do some researches and to document some of those challenges and to provide statistics that we can use to inform policies. The other thing we have done is we're also working with partners. So like our partners in Gilgil Seed Save Us, once in a while they organize markets for organic produce, where now we have farmers who actually now bring their produce there. So we have women farmers, so we organize markets and the women farmers bring their produce, and we ensure that people nearby are able to come and purchase from them. So we have actually taken it upon ourselves to actually make the markets work. Other than that, like I said, we cannot win this fight if we don't involve the men. So it's also working with men, especially those who we believe are our allies, who support women empowerment, to support gender equality, to show them the value of having to involve women across the agricultural value chains. And that has, in one way or another, it has helped and is helping to shape the conversation.
It's important to have, as you said earlier, a multi-pronged approach.
Yes.
It's not just the community, it's the community as men and women, and of course the government. You've said policy information, and it's really good to add on to policy, but how about implementation? What are some of the things that, have you contacted, the ministry? Are there some things that the ministry is helping you with to ensure that women have more access to markets? Could there be, women who just merchandise like those chamas? Is that a possibility?
Yes, I believe there are so many stakeholders that we can work with. Our project is, we haven't been around for very long, but we have already mapped allies in this sector. We have mapped stakeholders that we believe if we engage, we are going to have at least a certain level of success when it comes to especially implementation of policies, when it comes to implementation of laws. And we are not doing it alone. So we have identified allies, we have identified stakeholders, we have done researches, we have produced a book. So the first 2 years of the project were about researching and getting our data correct, so that this is the data we are, for example, presenting to these stakeholders, and we are saying, hey, look, these are the statistics, because like I said, we are working in 4 counties, and we didn't want to have like this national conversation. What are the statistics at county level? And are the county governments even aware that these things are happening, and what can be done? So if county governments are in charge of agriculture and water, how does devolution then translate to actual implementation of agricultural activities at county level? And have we audited whether actually devolution has helped to accelerate agricultural growth and support women or not? So those are some of the things we have been doing, but I agree, we have to work with stakeholders, we have to work with the ministries, we have to work with National Assembly when it comes to crafting these laws and bills. And amending some, we're also interrogating to see, because we have some very retrogressive laws when it comes to this sector. And also working with our National Assembly, for example, to see what can we amend, what can we enact, what can we introduce. It's 2024. We have laws that were made over 2 decades ago. Are they still applicable? Are they still applicable to today's situation?
And things have changed. And speaking of things that have changed, as we start to conclude this conversation, credit for purposes of buying inputs is at around 36.9% for women between the ages of 35 and 64 years. This is according to UN Women. I feel like this number is not so bad, especially considering the age bracket. It seems like women within this demographic are more into agri-tech. They want things to be easier. They are employing...
Agribusiness.
Yes, agribusiness. It's so much easier now to control the value chain. Do you believe that this is a good trajectory that we're taking?
I think this is a good trajectory that we are taking. And like I said, you see now when you start talking about agri-tech, you start talking about agribusiness. Now, those are things that young people can now associate
it's actually really important.
And also the other thing that I was going to say, one of the challenges of our rural women is also not being able to they're practicing the old agriculture, the one for the
plowing,
the physically training. And times have changed. And what mechanization of agriculture has done, unfortunately, it has also pushed women to the periphery, because mechanization then now needs men.
It's masculine. It's assumed to be masculine.
So we are also not involving women. But when it comes to agribusiness and agri-tech, and now we start looking at it from that direction, as you can see now the numbers have gone up. And we are now looking at women of between 35, so we have some element of young women there. So I believe when we start now looking at it from that dimension, we try to attract the young people into this space.
And I feel like if, the country positions itself in this perspective, you say, it's not the usual, you have to wear the rugged clothes and go into the farming, you take a hoe, you have to do a lot of physically straining activities. If you use, machines, it would be so much easier for you. Are there things maybe that your organization is doing on this front?
I think first is to do a research. Like I said, I think for me, generation of evidence in any new space that you're trying to get into is always very important. And like I said, one of the things we've been looking at is how are new technologies affecting women's participation in agriculture, and especially smallholder farmers. We have counties that are now using drones in Western Kenya. I mean, technology has gone to that level. And there are women in other counties that I don't want to mention that have never heard about a drone. So you are looking at that disparity, and you are looking at how can you close the gap that exists. So I believe there is so much to do. There is so much research around is mechanization of agriculture and introduction of new technologies. Is it going to help women or not? Is it going to push them to the periphery? Is it going to alienate them because then it becomes a masculine issue? But are we also providing the right training and education to ensure that we close that knowledge gap and we position women as actual beneficiaries of that technology and that mechanization? Right,
and as we begin to conclude, and I've said this before, conversation, women farmers are rarely engaged in policy making processes, and this is usually, policy making is very important in setting the boundaries that people should be operating within, and usually I believe for this particular, this particular issue, there's a lot of agency involved and advocacy that is involved. Could there be a way in which the women themselves are the ones who are advocating for this change?
Yes, by giving them the agency, like you said, by ensuring that we put the women at the decision-making table. But also I feel for us in the development world, once we have such projects and we have resources to shape certain projects, we do not put the beneficiary first. So it is our faces that are being seen. For example, it's a farmer who should be on this table discussing the issues, right? So one of the things we can do that is ensuring that we are participating or we are promoting farmer-led advocacy by putting the farmers in front of their issues, right? So farmers to be able to voice, not just us every day talking about, oh, there are these challenges in agriculture, women are facing ABCD, but where are the actual women? Where are the actual women farmers to speak up for themselves? So in addition to just creating that space for them to speak up, ensuring that we have given them the right tools, the right training, the right resources, we have taken them to the right offices, we have to train them, for example, how to come up with their own memorandas, right? We have to train them, for example, if you go to a public engagement meeting or a public participation meeting, this is what you say. You speak up for yourself. So I like that we are also thinking about promoting farmer-led advocacy by putting farmers in front, and we go behind and we support from a distance with resources, with the right training, with the right skills, and providing those platforms. But then we put the farmers to be the face of this problem, quote unquote. And I think if we do that, then we will have a crop of women farmers who are able to speak up for themselves, who are able to raise their own issues, because like you said, they are the wearer of the shoe. And sometimes people will not listen to us because, oh, then you are NGO. But when we do put farmers first and we support farmer-led advocacy and we put farmers as the people who are actually championing for this change, I think we're going to have some results.
Right, Mombi, and finally, this conversation has been very doom and gloom. The numbers are looking so depressing. Women are disenfranchised. They're disproportionately affected, especially when it comes to policies that have already been put in place that are not being implemented. But where do you see the future? Where do you see women in agriculture in the next 5 years? Will we still be playing at the 1 to 6% ownership, percentage?
I think that depends on how we shape our conversations moving forward. Like I said, do we just want to be pushing the wagon and not putting, like you have a wagon and you have wheels. It is moving, but you can't tell it's moving, but it's not it's not pushing any distance. So when we put farmers first, and we give them the right training, right skills, right resources. And then for us in the development world, we come up with the right interventions for these people.
Right.
I believe that in the next 5 years, we will have overcome a lot of challenges. We will have more women in leadership, and not just in the rural areas, but also in the political landscape. I think the other thing is that once we have women in the national landscape, I tend to feel that most women forget what other women in the rural areas are going through.
Right.
And I think it's a time to also interrogate female leadership at national level and how our women, and come up with programs to see how our women leaders are also supporting our efforts in the grassroots and in the rural areas to also raise another crop of leaders from the rural areas, right? So I see women who will be able to speak up for themselves if statistics are anything to go by. I believe that our project, actually it's ending in 5 years time, so
right.
I believe that yes, I want to believe, and not just HIVOS, but I know we are so many who are working in this space. If we collaborate and we have the right collaborative efforts, I believe that the statistics will not be all doom and gloom.
Right.
We will have something to celebrate and to be happy about. We will see women who are now included in policy making and policy formulation.
Right.
We will have strong women actually in leadership, and women who can actually speak about the challenges that they are going through in agriculture, but not just challenges, but also come up with solutions.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. That is Mombi Mugo, the Program Officer of the Rural Women Cultivating Change at, of course, HIVOS. Thank you so much for joining us once again. This has been The Marketplace. We have been talking about women, how they are disenfranchised when it comes to agriculture. We've given possible solutions, and in 5 years, we get to see what exactly has been happening. Have yourselves a very lovely night. My name is Hibat Said. Thank you so much, Mombi, for coming. I feel like this conversation has, considering we have delved into some of the numbers, you know, that we were looking at, and I was so depressed at 0. Was it 0.5?
Na safari hii katika Mfahamu Kiongozi tutakuletea viongozi aina mbalimbali.